Into a, I guess, Friday afternoon here. Some big news coming in right moments ago. Sedrick Van Pran, Georgia's starting center for the last 2 seasons. I think one of the best offensive linemen in college football, and quite frankly, a guy that I believe there wasn't a ready-made replacement on this roster. Announces that he is coming back for next season. We have Brandon Adams joining us. Jeff Sentell is going to hop on with us here as well. You see Sedrick Van Pran putting this out on Instagram moments ago that he is coming back. A huge win for the Georgia offensive line that is already going to have to replace both of its starting offensive tackles. It's also seen some analysts from that offensive line room, Eddie Gordon taking the UAB job, Devontae Densary taking a job at Abilene Christian there. There's some turnover there in this offensive line room, but they get back their leader, a captain for this 2022 national championship team, and a guy that, quite frankly, in BA, you'll weigh in here on this. You look at, say, Broderick Jones and Amarius Mims. You feel good about what Amarius Mims and Ernest Green can do in replacing Jones and Warren McClendon there. There wasn't that type of player to replace Sedrick Van Pran, and I think that speaks to what kind of player Georgia has in Van Pran and what they're getting back.
Yeah, this is just massive news because, as you said, Van Pran's really, to me, more than just a good player. He is one of those small handful of truly irreplaceable players that have come through Georgia. I'd say that Jordan Davis was like that a little bit. I think that an Andrew Thomas was like that a little bit too, where, hey, Georgia's got good players as its backups. They've got good depth, but there's a little bit of intangible quotient that makes Sedrick Van Pran-Granger even more valuable than that. He's ranked 50-something in the country coming out of high school. We don't typically give centers the 5-star rating, but pretty obviously this was the most important recruit that Georgia signed when it signed him. You see how he's played the last couple of years. You realize when that's the case. And I hate to turn this to a negative, but let's be honest here for a moment. Had he made a different decision, Connor, there's probably more unanswered questions about Georgia's offensive line for next season than we've ever had before. And there's a part of me, I have to admit, that I don't really feel even comfortable talking about that right now fully because of, obviously, the terrible tragedy from last Saturday. But if you want to just keep this to the boundaries of the field here for a moment, man, Georgia would have had potentially a lot of questions to answer about its offensive line. But when you give an emphatic answer like Van Pran, coming back, manning the middle once again, I think this is as big a return as Georgia could have gotten this year. This is just a pivotal player, and to have him back in 2023, I just think that absolutely bolsters Georgia's championship chances in a huge way.
Right, and two things before we let Jeff Sentell jump in here, who's known Sedrick, I think, longer than anybody and covered him. One, obviously the terrible, tragic passing of Devin Willock, that's obviously going to weigh heavy on this team. Sedrick Van Pran's leadership skills are second to none, and if there is anyone that is going to be able to lead this team through this difficult time, it is him. And I think with this offensive line, look, we saw with that quarterback battle in 2021 between JT Daniels and Stetson Bennett, the mobility there from Stetson Bennett was something that factored into that because of his ability to navigate an offensive line that, let's be quite honest, was just not up to the Georgia standard that we have seen in recent seasons. And so with Sedrick Van Pran back, with Amarius Mims stepping in at one of those tackle spots for sure, and Xavier Truss and Tate Ratledge coming back, along with another, crop of promising young offensive linemen, you feel a lot better about what this offensive line is going to look like as Georgia heads into year 3. And now we bring in Jeff, who you had a long conversation with Sedrick before the Peach Bowl. You've known him longer and as well as anybody. What is Georgia getting in bringing back Van Pran for another season, given a guy who has already won 2 national championships, has already been a captain and an all-SEC player, and who's already accomplished certainly enough, in my opinion, to go be a draft-eligible, probably a day 2 pick next season?
Yeah, guys, I can't stress enough. I said on the show, maybe a lot of shows, I said that this is the run it back guy. It doesn't really make sense to say run it back, but Sedrick Van Pran has been a leader from day one since he stepped into Georgia. He has deserved to be a leader. He has been ready to be a leader. I will never forget this young man. He lost his final play in high school of his junior year and senior year in the state championship game on the last play, and it was devastating. He pounded the ground after his senior season when his team went for 2 points, a 2-point conversion to win it, Brandon. That was not a good go-for-2 situation there for that Warren Easton team at all. And then when he wins the national championship at Georgia, I ask him, I say, hey, man, what's that like? You finally won the big one. And he's like, dude, honestly, I didn't even think about it. I didn't even think about me. I didn't think about I finally won the big game. He thought about Jamari Salyer. He thought about Justin Schaefer. He thought about the guys on his team that had been in Georgia for so long, chasing that title, and finally got to celebrate it. I think this is a move that either way, I think Sedrick Van Pran-Granger was going to be revered, but I think this is a move now that moves him into that hallowed circle of Georgia football. You're going to see 63 jerseys. You're going to see everybody throwing. I mean, I know everybody likes to think this is a pun, but DGD status certainly secured for this one, right? And I'm going to tell you, Sedrick is a guy, you go ahead and pencil him in at SEC Media Days. Go in and pencil him in everywhere as one of these speaking voices for Georgia football in a way that I don't know if we've seen in quite some time. And then your offensive line looks pretty good if it goes Mims, Ratledge, Van Pran-Granger, Truss, and then Ernest Green III, or flip-flop your tackles. Already you can sit there and say 2022, 2023 offensive line is pretty sporty, even compared next to the 2022 model. And that Joe Moore Award, the Georgia offensive line, is coming for you guys in part 3.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's something that Van Pran had talked about wanting to win prior to this year. So I know he'll come back motivated on that. The other thing, to add some more context to this, think about a guy like Isaiah Wynn for a moment. Wynn is one of the best offensive linemen that Georgia's probably ever had, certainly in this modern era. He was great at 4 positions. They tried him at center, though, and he couldn't do it. I'm not saying that as a slight at him. I'm just saying center is a little bit different kind of position. So this idea that you could have just slid somebody in there and have that be fine, that's not necessarily the way that goes. This is a specialized position. I believe its importance has become more manifest here in recent years, and I'll give you a specific example of how this shows up. We're going to be breaking a new starting quarterback next year. How much better is that now, knowing that guy's going to take snaps from a guy who's seemingly done this for 1,000 years?
Yeah, and as a former center, I'll say, it's not something that you can easily pick up and learn, both in terms of just snapping under center and even shotgun snapping there. And I know they've tried it with Jared Wilson, a guy that they really like in his ability, and he has, from my indication, struggled with the ability to make that transition there. And so, if we're Van Pran to have moved on, it would have been between Jared Wilson and Austin Blaske. And the staff likes Austin Blaske, but there's a significant drop off from what Van Pran is to what Blaske is right now. And, Jeff, you touched on this, BA, you did touch on this earlier. The face of that 2021 team was Jordan Davis. He was the guy that said, I'm coming back for another year. I'm going to be the vocal leader on this team. I'm going to be the face of this team. And that team ended up winning a championship in part because of Davis's leadership. Last year, I think Nolan Smith fit that bill of that guy who that was going to be. Could have gone to the NFL, elected not to, decided to come back, and ultimately he isn't able to finish the year as he battles through a labrum injury or a pectoral injury there. But his value on that team was measured far beyond what it was able to do and what he was able to bring to an on-field standpoint. And I think Van Pran absolutely fits what this team is going to be about next year. It is going for a 3rd national championship. It will be his 3rd as a starter. That is not a coincidence there for Georgia. And the fact that you have a guy who, even as talented as Van Pran is, I think he's the best center in college football coming back next season. I believe he would have been, one of the first 3 or 4 centers off the board in this year's NFL draft. Bringing him back next year, bringing that veteran leadership back for a team where Kirby Smart has said this is going to be a more difficult challenge next season than it was this previous season. There is no better player, in my opinion, to have back. Obviously, Jalen Carter, Broderick Jones, Darnell Washington, they're all fabulously talented. I think from a leadership standpoint, the value that Van Pran brings actually does outstrip what some of the tangible qualities that those guys bring in.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is if you're like a casual fan or like someone that doesn't live and die with this stuff the way a lot of our audience does, some of this probably seems a little bit funny, the fact that we're like falling all over ourselves about a center returning. This is not the kind of thing that sort of moves the casual fan who only knows coaches and quarterbacks. But if you're one of those people that happens to be tuned in today, now most of our audience is well versed in the story, but if you're a casual person that's tuned in, trust me when I tell you, this is bad news for Georgia's rivals. This is bad news for the teams ranked near Georgia in the upcoming preseason top 25. They've been way too early, so the official ones will come out later on this summer. This is a big step towards championship contention. Again, here for Georgia for a number of reasons, because of the quality of play, because of the leadership, and what is, I hate to bring it back to this, but it is just true, what's going to be a very challenging year for Georgia in more ways than one. It is so nice to have a comfortable voice like Van Pran-Granger still guiding that room.
Guys, I love it. I love it for this team in so many ways. I think you guys have hit on all the right points. I think, listen, Kirby even said it. I said it on Brandon's show earlier this morning, that when the Dogs went and got dirty and they wanted to find out how good they really were, iron versus iron, sharpen that iron up. Everybody knows about Bloody Tuesday, of course. But like the guy that led the offense against Jalen Carter in the defense was Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. Guys, and Connor wasn't kidding. I mean, really, for a moment, you were looking at Georgia's team and hearing about what they were doing in practices. And Drew Bobo might have even been the center of the future candidate. Austin Blasky can play a lot of positions. Jared Wilson has incredible offensive line ability, but he just couldn't get that snap down. And it was like, well, Georgia'd find somebody and he'd be pretty good, but I think everybody that wants to say All-American candidate at center, All-SEC candidate at center, a guy that will probably be the second or third pick in the draft this year at center. He's going to be the second and third pick in the draft next year at center. Make this point very clearly here. Sedrick Van Pran-Granger has always valued academics. I'll never forget. I was on a boat somewhere in like Lake Oconee when Sedrick Van Pran-Granger was like 2 years away from choosing Georgia. And he told me about his first visit to Georgia. He told me about Sam Pittman. He told me about what it was like being at the team, being around the team, being inside the stadium. And he's like, yeah, that's all good and all, but I want to be a graphic designer. That's what I want to do with my life. And big thing here is Sedrick Van Pran-Granger would have been a standout young man at the University of Georgia if he was 5'10" and 180 pounds and played the clarinet and redcoat band. He's that kind of individual. He's that kind of special person who would help the university regardless if he could play a football at all. And he's coming back for a three-peat. You guys need to know all about Berger. Connor, I hope he trots out and makes you beat writers overfed because he comes out every week or every other week talking to the media, because that's the guy who should speak for Georgia, and that's the guy who should represent Georgia, the very best of Georgia.
I'm going to do some reckless speculation here for a moment. No one does it better. If I'm an offensive coordinator making $2 million a year and my center's coming back on a team that's fairly well loaded with talent, isn't that a better job for me than what might be the lame duck year for Todd Bowles before they fire him for poor clock management and wild card or divisional round playoff games? I guess wild card playoff game.
Yeah, BA is referencing there. Todd Monken has been linked to the Tampa Bay opening there. And I sort of hit on this on Twitter yesterday. I get why Monken would be linked there. He's worked there before. He's clearly shown that he's one of the best, I think, offensive minds in both college and professional football. But with what Georgia has coming back, look, if Kirby Smart has 100% approval rating, Todd Monken might have even higher than that. I don't think there's a way you can complain about the job that Todd Monken has done here. And so when you bring back the talent that Georgia is bringing back next season, and look, again, I think this time next year, let's say Georgia's offense is as strong as we think it is, with a receiving core that's going to be very good, a running back room that has a lot of upside, and now an offensive line that I think once again should be one of the best in the country. If you're able to replace Stetson Bennett with, either Carson Beck, Brock Vandergriff, or Gunnar Stockton and not miss a beat, you go from a guy who might be, an offensive coordinator somewhere in the NFL to running your own shop at a college level, because you've seen you can replace the players consistently at Georgia. It'll be his fourth year potentially with the program. And I know it's going to, I believe there are 8 offensive coordinator openings at the NFL level right now. So obviously a few of those are going to probably kick the tires on Todd Monken. But from the Tampa Bay job, which has been the one that he has been most seriously linked to, I agree with BA here. On paper, it doesn't make a lot of sense for Monken to want to leave Georgia. And I know people will say, well, what if he doesn't like recruiting, NIL? My understanding is Todd Monken is not all that heavily involved in that as it is at this point in time. And so because of that, I think the idea that he's going to leave because of recruiting purposes or reasons, I don't buy that.
Yeah, let me tell you what I said on my show today through my flu-like symptoms that I'm dealing with.
Leave my guy alone.
Flu-like.
So first things first, I think we know that Bill O'Brien wants an NFL job. In fact, he may have already taken the Patriots offensive coordinator job. I know there's been some chatter about that. I think it is well known that O'Brien, who interviewed, I guess, for job last year, is interested in leaving. Frankly, I think that Nick Saban's trying to push him out the door. We know that. We don't actually know what Monken really wants. The folks in Tampa are saying they don't know what he wants to do. What concerning me as a Georgia fan is I haven't heard, a credible voice here locally refute it yet, which I'd certainly like to hear. And I haven't really heard that yet, which I guess makes me want to take it a little bit seriously. But this is a very different situation than Bill O'Brien, where O'Brien may know that he's worn out his welcome in Tuscaloosa and he actually needs to leave for the NFL. And he's just sort of looking for a good fit, whether it's old boss Bill Belichick or his old quarterback, Tom Brady. I guess Brady, if he were to stay in Tampa, honestly, don't know. But we know O'Brien wants to leave. We just don't know what Todd Monken wants to do one way or another. We are literally just guessing as to what his motives might be.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Come on, Brandon. You really think Todd Bowles is going to ruin his son to Georgia fans everywhere by pulling and pillaging and pirating the offensive coordinator away from the Dogs? I mean,
it's right.
folks that don't know this story, Todd Bowles, his son, Troy Bowles, a heck of a linebacker. I mean, he's a guy that you guys are going to go, where does Georgia keep finding these Nakobe, Raquan clones? I mean, that's what they are. It almost feels like Clone Wars, Brandon, to like look at the linebacker room at Georgia. But he could be a safety, he could be a linebacker. He's an All-American. Somehow he's the third highest rated linebacker coming into Georgia in this class. That's his dad. Sounds like a future coach already. And I mean, the Monken story, I think, will dominate the narrative right now. And I mean, rightfully so. But like, I'm going to tell you, Connor, all those beat writers have been writing those stories about the biggest question mark for Georgia in 2023. They would have talked about Sedrick Van Pran-Granger on the offensive line as much as they would have Stetson, as much as they would have Darnell or Jalen Carter or anything like that. And folks, there's a major building block here. Can't stress this enough. Guys going to be concerned with quarterbacks and transfer portal and everything else. Guys, this is a building block for a 3-peat championship in Athens.
Well, I'll say this, and this may sound like hating. I think it's just fact, and I'll take a Sedrick Van Pran-Granger over 280 Mitchells. And I don't mean to be a jerk. I'm not trying to have sour grapes on that. We've kind of all set our piece on Mitchell one way or another. But Sedrick Van Pran-Granger is a far more important player for this team than A.D. Mitchell would be. And in fact, we see the evidence of that in a 15-0 season this past year.
There is no bigger gap between a player that is leaving Georgia to his replacement than what there would have been from Sedrick Van Pran. The gap from Jalen Carter to Bear Alexander is not as big as the gap from Sedrick Van Pran to Austin Blasky or Jared Wilson. That's no disrespect to either of those two players. It is a statement of how good Sedrick Van Pran is at both, on field, being a center, being the guy that navigates the calls, makes all the calls, is able to work to the second level in the run game there. Georgia led the country in rushing touchdowns this season. That is not something that should be overlooked for all the, gripes about how they played in the red zone there. This is a Georgia offense, 41 points a game, fourth in the country there. And the best Georgia offenses have almost always been led by their offensive line. I think the 2022 offense and the 2018 offense, in terms of points per game, are the high watermarks under Kirby Smart. Coincidentally, those are probably also the two best offensive line that Georgia has had. And while, yes, there is going to be an adjustment going from a guy in Warren McClendon who has 37 career starts and Broderick Jones, who's going to be a first-round pick, to going to Amarius Mims and either Ernest Green, Tate Ratledge, and you move him around, Michael Morris, whoever that other offensive tackle might be, that you have a guy in Sedrick Van Pran who, even without getting into the obvious intangible benefits that he brings to this team, I think is just going to make this offense all the much more better and keep them on a level where they're at the very least consistently among the top teams in the country, if not potentially the best offense in the country next year with what they bring back and with what we have seen. Stetson Bennett in year 3 of the Todd Monken offense. Well, if it is Carson Beck, who I believe is the favorite to be the starting quarterback right now for Georgia, what does he look like in year 4 of this offense? Now, obviously, he's got to get the game reps and get up to the speed there. But once he gets his legs under him, and whether it be him, Brock Vandegrift, Oregon, or Stockton, now that those guys all sort of have a level of familiarity within this Todd Monken offense, we've seen it get better every year since Monken has been here. Why can't that be the case once again in 2023?
I think that's exactly right, that it could be kind of the pathway and all that. And I guess what I'd also ask in place of that to both of you is, last year we saw Georgia rotate a lot with its offensive line to a degree that I thought was a little bit weird to begin the season, but obviously there was a reason they were doing that. One of the guys they played in that situation ended up being your starter at right tackle at the end of the season. I'm not quite so sure Georgia wins the national championship without Mims and maybe the experience that he gained. Do you think that Georgia will kind of take a page from that? Will we see an Austin Blasky or a Jared Wilson maybe playing more during the season? Because you may delay this conversation for a year, but next year you're doing the same thing again of, oh gosh, how do you replace a center as good as Sedrick Van Pran-Granger? Given the fact that I saw Bill Conley from ESPN on this today, there is only one game on the Georgia schedule for this upcoming season via the ESPN SP Plus that Georgia has less than a 90% chance of winning. The Georgia is obviously an overwhelming favorite in every game that it plays. Does that buy them the luxury of playing someone else at Van Pran at center a little bit more so that this transition is maybe made easier next year, especially given the fact they did that a good bit this past year?
I mean, Brandon, the only thing that looks worse than you today is Georgia's 2023 schedule.
Yeah.
Can you give me that one, brother? And it looks like Brandon got in a bare knuckle fight with the transfer portal and NIL. But look at this. This is a point that has to be made on this show, is that the transfer portal and NIL giveth and it taketh. But in this situation, think about this. Everybody wants the best for Sedrick Van Pran-Granger, his future. Think about this. 2nd and 3rd round pick money for a center. You can kind of get to that for 1 year with NIL. Hope everybody, all those collectives, all those businesses look at Sedrick Van Pran-Granger as an asset and a pillar of this team for what he is. But you can find a way to make sure his last year at Georgia, his three-peat ride at Georgia, you can get him to about $1 million, $1.5 million, maybe, or even 800,000 to $1 million or whatever. And that's kind of comparable to year one money for a third-round pick as a center in the NFL. And that's the part about NIL. We're going to hate it. We're going to hate it. We're going to hate it. But that's the way it can help a young man's decision to come back and play for his alma mater, play for his team one more time, and make it economically feasible.
By the way, if you want to know if my day wasn't already bad enough, not exactly feeling my best, the closest I've been to being sick since 2015, I've got my boss in our open chat here laughing at you for making fun of how I look. So there you go. So if things weren't already bad enough, they've now taken a turn. I've now become fodder for everybody's jokes here today. So listen, I need those kinds of things to keep me on. So I guess I'll live with it.
Look, BA, I was worried that the streak was going to come to an end and that we weren't going to get a DawgNation Daily when I heard BJ come on our morning call this morning, but he said you're going to get it at. Now, look, Sedrick Van Pran, he's got you smiling, happy. I'm sure many Georgia fans.
Even Kevin Costner could end my consecutive games played streak.
That is a deep internet joke
that a few people can get.
Look, this might not be met with the fanfare that certain other moves have been met with or made or draw the interest. In terms of winning a national championship next year for Georgia, there is no bigger, I think, or has been no bigger, decision or declaration to come than with what Sedrick Van Pran has decided. And I think that stands true even with deciding what Todd Monken is going to do, even with the Glenn Schumann rumors out there. And they're just that. They are rumors. Glenn Schumann was out recruiting with Kirby Smart last night. I know Alabama fans are jonesing to get their hands on him. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't expect that to happen. Even with those coaches and even with coaching changes going to continue, you'll see that after National Signing Day. We know enough about the college football calendar. That's when you're going to see these go again. Bring back a guy in Sedrick Van Pran-Granger who has the institutional knowledge that he does here at Georgia and what he's going to bring to this team in this coming season is they try and do something that has never been done in college football. No team has won 3 consecutive undisputed national championships. That's what Georgia is going for. It's going to be a tough challenge just staying that motivated, but there's a guy that is going to be able to lead them through this upcoming season. I don't think there's a better person or player out there capable of doing it than Sedrick.
First of all, some of our commenters are saying I'm actually hungover. Some of y'all think I live a far more interesting life than I live. I got a 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. If you think I'm out boozing it up on a Thursday night, I wish I was living the life that some of y'all think that I'm living, if that's indeed the case. I can promise you we were by 9 p.m.
I'm just waiting for somebody in the comment stream to make a joke about Randy Quaid and auditioning for Christmas Vacation Part 4 or something like that. The crapper's full, but hey, I want to get your thoughts on this, guys. Everybody's, who saw the Glenn Schumann Instagram post yesterday, the Twitter post, where he talked about, I've known you for 7 years. There's no way that dude's going to Alabama, making that, see you soon, love you.
He's told him 4 times. Like half his social media message the last few days have been, Alabama, I'm sorry, it's not you, it's me. Like he's not going to Alabama. He's told him that 1 million times.
So we know where this roster sort of is right now. They've had, I think, 22, 23 total guys make their declaration, 10 guys to the NFL draft, 10 guys to the portal. We're probably going to see some more portal guys when the May window opens up, but we have a much better idea of what this team is going to look like next year, at least on the field. With the offensive line seemingly no longer being an issue, I asked BA, I asked Jeff here, what is your biggest area or position of concern entering this 2023 season? Because it would have been offensive line if we were here discussing Sedrick Van Pran leaving, but now that he's coming back, I think that takes that off the table.
I'm not quite ready to move off the offensive line as of yet because, listen, I think Ernest Green is a phenomenal prospect. And listen, most programs are just be thankful to have a guy like that ready to step into a starting role, but that's still an inexperienced player who's battled injury. So offensive line is still a pretty big deal for me. But if you want me to give you something else, I guess I'll also start thinking about the secondary situation there a little bit as well, because, clearly we saw Georgia have some issues there. You need a guy like Malachi Starks to grow up. I believe that he will. I think he's going to be one of your best players this upcoming season. But, you've got some guys you're going to ask even more from next year because Christopher Smith's not there. So I'm not quite ready to disregard offensive line as a really important issue on this team. Obviously, this is a huge answer here. And I guess my next thing might be the defensive secondary.
I got 3, Connor, and all 3 of these is better be on every
6 position groups.
No. I got three guys, and every one of them better be on everybody's Family Feud answer on the board or whatever. Replacing Chris Smith, the opposite safety there. You got to think about the kicker position there. It's probably going to be a true freshman in Peyton Woodring, who has Joe Montana ice water veins with a huge leg. I mean, probably the biggest leg Georgia has had at kicker in years. And I mean, all the Kirby era and everything else. I think the other position I kind of look at is the outside linebacker. You got to figure out where that pass rush is coming. If you want to look at 3 question marks, which is 3 question marks most of college football would love to have, I think those are kind of the 3 biggest for Georgia.
How about you?
I would agree there with Jeff. I think outside linebacker, now granted, they got through this year, again, second half of the year, not a ton of production from there in terms of forcing a pass rush or things like that. You would like to see Marvin Jones, to me, is one of the more important players this offseason in terms of, is he making the steps forward that you need to see him do and need to see?
My prediction is he will not participate in spring practice.
Yeah, he's been pretty banged up all season. I would not be surprised if he has some sort of surgery announced relatively soon. We've seen that time and time again in the offseason, and so I think that makes it an even more critical offseason for him there. They're really young at that outside linebacker position. Outside of Chaz Chandler, there's really no experience at that position there. And while, yes, you have Michael Williams, you have Jalen Walker, guys who you're able to move around and generate pressure from, that outside linebacker position was really important for Georgia. And to be that young and that inexperienced, I think it's going to be really interesting in seeing how that plays out. And one other thing I would note here as well, Jeff mentioned kicker and special teams. Yeah. Jack Podlesny missed his final extra point in his collegiate career, but he was not using his regular holder in that situation. Stetson Bennett was not the holder on that final extra point. They've been trying to get Brett Thorson, to get accustomed to that role. I think that is one thing to maybe watch going forward. We're way deep in the weeds here, but special teams is an area next year where there are just a lot of questions for Georgia that, quite frankly, there haven't been in recent years. Brett Thorson didn't have to punt a whole lot this season, and even when he did, I think it's clear he's not Jake Camarda. Jake Camarda is one of the best punters I think maybe I've ever seen. And so there are some questions about what Georgia can do in the special teams unit next season with losing Jack Podlesny, who also handled kickoffs for them as well. Yeah. So I think the special teams area, in addition to the outside linebacker position, is an area to really watch going forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do. And I agree with what y'all said about outside linebacker there as well. I mean, obviously you're breaking in some new faces in a real pivotal role. I guess my prediction is, given the fact that Georgia played so much this year that Nolan Smith, I do believe they'll be better outside linebacker than they were this year, though.
Especially to end the season as well with what we saw against Ohio State in that game where, yes, they finished with 4 sacks, but they could have finished with 8, 9, 10. And that they didn't is why that game was as close. And quite frankly, why Ohio State should have won if Noah Ruggles is able to make a late kick there. But sort of putting a bow in it, final thoughts here. We've gone about half an hour. BA, we're trying to get you to the weekend where you won't have any shows to do, and hopefully you can heal before Monday. Final thoughts, Sedrick Van Pran back for a 3rd season as Georgia's starting center, his 4th year in school. What does his return mean to you, and what do you think it means to this Georgia program?
I think it's the best possible news that Georgia could have gotten during this time of year. Georgia was already going to be preseason number 1. To me, this just cements that status that much further.
Jeff?
Agree with the best possible return. I mean, call him the center, call him the anchor, call him the pillar. That's what he is. Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. They call him Burger, those that know him very well. So, dude, I don't even eat hamburgers, and I might go eat a hamburger today. That's such good news for Georgia football and everything else. And, the other thing I'll say is whoever the quarterback's going to be, and this story will dominate the airwaves, that quarterback just got a stinking ton better with the retention and the return of SVPG3. Guys, just put 3 figures up randomly to people walking down the street today. That's what you need to do. Put up 3. That's what
I'm concerned about. Go for 3 and 23. We eventually get there. Is I have a little bit of issue with this sort of ring finger. It's hard for me to do the 3 fingers like that. I'm gonna have to sort of do
You can do the German 3 and use the thumb as well.
That's not bad.
So
that's not bad.
And Sedrick Van Pran kind of sounds German, Brandon. So there you go. You can just be doing it for.
That is true.
Again, the leadership that he brings to this room, obviously this team is still, and this position group is still hurting, obviously, in the wake of the awful Devin Willock news. I can't think of a better representative and a better person and player to sort of lead Georgia through this next phase and into, as I clumsily make the transition into football, into trying to win a 3rd straight title. The team is playing for a lot next season, and a lot is going to fall on the shoulders of the leaders on this team, and bringing Sedrick back. I think he's an unquestioned leader for this team and a guy that is going to fill major roles, both in terms of what they can do on the offensive line, but also from a leadership perspective. Being a permanent captain from this team, there is not a long list of two-time permanent captains in Georgia football history, and Sedrick Van Pran is certainly going to be on that list. And so
that's a great point, Connor. Great point.
We'll keep you guys updated in terms of what comes next before Georgia. Obviously, coaching rumors now sort of move into the fold with the NFL draft window being closed, with the transfer portal window being closed. Obviously, guys still have their decisions to make. 5 players do not have homes yet. I did hear that A.D. Mitchell was visiting Texas this weekend. That should surprise absolutely nobody here. We'll keep you guys updated and informed. We'll try and get Brandon back to house so he can be 100% when he's back in front of the mic on Monday morning with DawgNation.
By the way, shout out to Marcus Rosemy-Jackson running it back too. 3 of Georgia's top 5 receivers for the previous year coming back for 2023. That's not nothing either.
No, it is not. If you look at history, wide receiver yards have traditionally been a pretty good indicator of where your offense might be in terms of having to replace that, how much of a struggle it can be. So with that, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Big news of the day. Sedrick Van Pran announces he is returning to Georgia for another season. Bulldogs get their starting center, permanent captain back. As Georgia tries to win a 3rd straight national championship, there is no single player that could have been more impactful to coming back than Sedrick Van Pran. We will see you guys on Monday, or I'll see you on Sunday night. You'll see BA on Monday. Everyone have a great weekend. Enjoy the weather. It looks pretty nice outside. And Sedrick Van Pran back in Athens for another season.
Good stuff.